The Pacific Ocean stretched endless and black beneath the cargo freighter's deck, a void waiting to swallow whatever the world threw into it. Lieutenant Commander Elise Calloway knelt at the edge of that void, her knees grinding against rusted steel grating, her wrists bound behind her back with military-grade zip ties that had long since cut through skin. Blood dripped from her fingers in a slow, steady rhythm. Her ankles were shackled to a cinder block slick with ocean slime and engine grease. She had stopped counting the hours of torture somewhere around 40. The men standing behind her spoke in clipped German and broken English, their cigarette smoke drifting past her face and out over the rail into the darkness. 3 of them, maybe 4. Her left eye had swollen completely shut 2 beatings ago, and her right wasn't much better. But she could still see the water, and she could still hear the man walking toward her now, his boots clicking against the deck with the measured pace of someone who enjoyed taking his time. Victor Renner stopped beside her and crouched down until his face was level with hers. He was 53 years old, former German Special Forces, and he had the eyes of a man who had stopped seeing human beings as human beings a very long time ago. He reached out and gripped her jaw, turning her face toward him. "You know," he said, his accent curling around the words, "I have broken many people in my career, strong men, soldiers, intelligence officers who thought they were prepared for anything." Elise said nothing. Her jaw ached too badly to speak, and even if it didn't, she had nothing to say to this man. Victor smiled. "But you are something different, Lieutenant Commander. 48 hours and you have given me nothing. Not a name, not a code, not even the satisfaction of hearing you scream." He released her jaw and stood up, brushing his hands against his pants as if touching her had somehow soiled him. "I respect that," Hu continued. "Truly, I do. Your father would be proud." Elise's good eye snapped up at that. Her father. How did he know about her father? Victor caught the reaction, and his smile widened. "Oh yes, I know who you are. I know whose daughter you are. Did you think this was coincidence? That you simply stumbled onto my ship during a routine reconnaissance mission?" He leaned down again, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You were sent here, Lieutenant Commander. Sent to me, like a gift." The words hit her harder than any of the blows she had endured over the past 2 days. Sent here. That meant someone had betrayed her. Someone in her own chain of command had handed her over to these people. But why? Victor straightened and gestured to his men. "Bring the block." 2 of them stepped forward and grabbed the cinder block, dragging it toward the rail. The chain connecting it to Elise's ankles pulled taut, forcing her to shuffle forward on her knees. The edge of the deck loomed closer. Victor walked beside her, matching her pace, his hands clasped behind his back like a professor escorting a student to an examination. "You Americans," he said, "you think you own the oceans. Your navy, your carriers, your submarines. You patrol these waters like gods, believing nothing can touch you." They reached the rail. Beyond it, there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of waves. Victor leaned in close to her ear, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let us see what the ocean thinks about that." Then he nodded to his men. The one holding the cinder block heaved it over the rail. For one eternal second, Elise felt the chain go taut around her ankles, felt the weight begin to pull her forward. And then she was falling. The water hit her like concrete, cold, absolute cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, but reaches inside you and grabs hold of your bones. Elise plunged through the surface and kept going, dragged down by 40 pounds of concrete and chain. The pressure built in her ears immediately, a high-pitched whine that grew louder with every foot she descended. 10 feet, 20. The light from the freighter's deck disappeared above her, swallowed by the black water until she couldn't tell which direction was up and which was down. 30 feet. Her lungs began to burn. She had managed to grab one last breath before hitting the water, but it wouldn't last long. Not with the way her heart was pounding. Not with the way the cold was already sapping the oxygen from her blood. 40 feet. The darkness was complete now. Total. She couldn't see her own hands behind her back, couldn't see the chain wrapped around her ankles, couldn't see anything except the faint bioluminescent flicker of plankton disturbed by her passage. But she could feel. And what she felt was the slight ridge sewn into the inner seam of her wetsuit, just behind her right knee. The ridge that concealed a ceramic blade 3 inches long, waterproof, invisible to metal detectors, and sharp enough to cut through bone. They had searched her when they captured her. They had stripped away her weapons, her communications equipment, her GPS beacon. They had been thorough, but they hadn't known what to look for. Elise twisted her wrists behind her back, ignoring the way the zip ties dug deeper into her flesh, ignoring the blood that clouded the water around her hands. She reached for the seam. Found it. Her fingers were numb from the cold, clumsy and slow, but she managed to work the blade free from its hiding place. The ceramic handle slipped into her palm like an old friend. 50 feet. Her lungs screamed for air. Her chest spasmed, trying to force her to inhale. Every instinct in her body demanded that she open her mouth and breathe. She didn't. Instead, she bent her wrists at an impossible angle and began sawing at the zip tie. The blade was sharp. The blade was designed for exactly this purpose. But the angle was wrong, and her hands were numb, and the pressure was crushing her chest, and the darkness was everywhere. Stroke, stroke, stroke. The plastic began to give. 60 feet. Her vision was graying at the edges now, oxygen deprivation setting in. In another 30 seconds, she would lose consciousness. In another 60, she would be dead. Stroke, 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 snap. The zip tie parted. Elise brought her hands around in front of her body and immediately went to work on the chain wrapped around her ankles. The shackle was simple, a padlock design she had picked 100 times in training, but that had been in a well-lit room with full oxygen and instructors standing by with stopwatches. This was different. This was the Pacific Ocean at 60 feet with her lungs on fire and her brain starting to shut down. She found the keyhole by touch, inserted the tip of the blade, applied pressure. Nothing. 70 feet. The cinder block was still pulling her down, still dragging her toward a depth from which there would be no return. She had maybe 20 seconds of consciousness left. She applied pressure again. The lock clicked open. Elise kicked free of the shackle and shoved off the cinder block with both feet, sending it tumbling into the abyss below her. Then she turned her body vertical and began to kick upward, her legs churning against the water, her arms pulling in desperate strokes. 60 feet, 50, 40. Her lungs had stopped screaming. That was a bad sign. It meant her body had given up, had accepted that it wasn't going to get air, had begun the process of shutting down to conserve whatever oxygen remained. 30 feet, 20. She could see light now, the faint gray glow of the surface filtering down through the water. It looked impossibly far away. 10 feet. Elise broke the surface and gasped. Air. Salt air. The most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She floated on her back, chest heaving, stars exploding across her vision as oxygen flooded back into her brain. For a long moment, she couldn't do anything except breathe and stare up at the night sky and remind herself that she was alive. Then she turned in the water and looked for the ship. It was gone. The freighter had continued on its course, its lights already vanishing over the horizon, its crew confident that the woman they had thrown overboard was sinking toward the bottom of the Pacific with 40 pounds of concrete chained to her ankles. They had no idea she had survived. They had no idea what was coming for them. Elise treaded water slowly, conserving energy, taking stock of her situation. She was injured, bleeding from multiple wounds, exhausted from 48 hours of torture. She was alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no boat, no radio, no GPS, and no rescue coming. But she was alive, and somewhere on the hull of that freighter, a passive magnetic beacon was broadcasting her location to anyone who knew how to listen. She reached down and felt along the inside of her belt until she found the slight bulge of the flotation sleeve. One sharp tug activated the CO2 cartridge, and the sleeve inflated just enough to keep her head above water without expending energy. Then she looked up at the stars, found Orion, calculated the angle, and began to swim. 48 hours earlier, Elise Callaway had been sitting in a briefing room at Naval Base San Diego, listening to a mission profile that should have raised every red flag in her training. Solo reconnaissance, no backup, no extraction plan, minimal communication protocol. The target was a cargo freighter called the Meridian Star, flagged out of Panama, suspected of transporting stolen American weapons to buyers in the Horn of Africa. Intelligence suggested the ship would pass through a specific corridor of international waters in 3 days, and someone needed to get aboard, plant a tracking beacon, document the cargo, and get out. That someone was Elise. She had asked the obvious questions. Why solo? Why no backup? Why the rush? The answers had come from Admiral Thomas Richardson himself. He had been her father's commanding officer 20 years ago, had delivered the eulogy at the memorial service, had personally recruited Elise into naval intelligence when she was 22 years old. He had been her mentor, her advocate, her protector within the labyrinth of military politics. She had trusted him more than anyone alive. "This one needs to be quiet," Richardson had said. "The wrong people are watching. If we send a team, they'll know. But one person, the right person, can slip in and out without anyone noticing." The right person. He had looked at her when he said it, and she had understood what he meant. She was the right person because she was the best, because her record was spotless, because she had spent 12 years proving that she belonged in a world that didn't always want her there. And because her father had been the best too, once, before a mission went wrong, and the Navy told her he died a hero without ever explaining what that meant. So she had taken the mission. She had studied the freighter's schematics until she could navigate its corridors blindfolded. She had trained for the insertion, practicing her approach on similar vessels until she could climb a hull in the dark without making a sound. She had prepared her equipment with the obsessive attention to detail that had kept her alive through a dozen operations in places whose names were still classified. The gear list was minimal but precise. A ceramic blade hidden in the wetsuit seam, undetectable by metal detectors or standard pat-downs. A passive magnetic beacon that would adhere to any ferrous surface and broadcast a unique signature on a frequency monitored by naval intelligence. A CO2-activated flotation sleeve sewn into her belt, invisible to casual inspection. A signaling mirror. An emergency flare rated for underwater ignition. Every piece served a purpose. Every piece had been tested 100 times. Every piece could mean the difference between survival and death. The insertion itself had gone perfectly. She had approached the Meridian Star at 0200 hours, riding a low-profile submersible to within a quarter-mile of the ship, then swimming the rest of the distance with her gear sealed in a waterproof pack. The hull was rusted and pitted, with plenty of handholds for someone who knew how to use them. She had climbed aboard through a maintenance hatch on the starboard side, moving through the ship like a shadow, avoiding the skeleton crew on night watch. The cargo hold had been exactly where the intelligence said it would be, and the cargo had been worse than anyone expected. Crates upon crates of American weapons, M4 rifles, M249 machine guns, Javelin missiles, all of it with the serial number scratched off, all of it bound for buyers who would use it to kill American soldiers and allies around the world. Elise had photographed everything. She had planted her beacon on the interior of the hull, low enough that it would be underwater when the ship was fully loaded, invisible to any inspection that didn't know exactly what to look for. Then she had turned to leave, and Victor Renner had been standing in the doorway. He hadn't been alone. 6 men with automatic weapons had fanned out behind him, their laser sights painting red dots across her chest. "Lieutenant Commander Callaway," he had said, smiling like a man who had just won a bet. "We have been expecting you." In that moment, Elise had known. This wasn't a blown operation. This wasn't bad luck or bad timing. This was a setup. Someone had told them she was coming. Someone had given them her name, her face, her insertion point, her timeline. Someone had gift-wrapped her and handed her over to these people. The only question was, who? The first 24 hours of captivity had been almost clinical. They had taken her to a converted shipping container deep in the freighter's hold, a steel box that had been outfitted with restraints, a drain in the floor, and a single fluorescent light that never turned off. The container was positioned directly above the engine room, and the constant vibration made sleep impossible, even when they allowed it. But Elise used those hours wisely. She counted footsteps in the corridor outside, timed the guard rotations, listened to the rhythm of the ship's engines, and memorized the pattern. When they moved her for interrogation, she tracked every turn, every ladder, every hatch. She built a mental map of the freighter's interior, committing it to memory with the same precision she had used to memorize infiltration routes and extraction protocols. They thought they were breaking her. They didn't realize she was gathering intelligence. Victor had been patient at first, professional. He had explained in calm and reasonable terms exactly what information he needed and exactly what would happen if she refused to provide it. He wanted to know about the intelligence network that had identified his operation. He wanted names of other agents, communication protocols, encryption keys. He wanted to know who else knew about the weapons shipment and how to find them. Elise had given him nothing, so the professionalism had ended, and the real work had begun. Waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation. They had beaten her with methodical precision, targeting joints and pressure points to maximize pain while minimizing permanent damage. They had left her hanging from her wrists for hours at a time, her shoulders screaming, her feet barely touching the floor. And through it all, Victor had kept talking. He told her about the 6 intelligence officers who had tried to investigate his operation before her. He showed her photographs of their faces, their service records, their families. Then he showed her what had happened to them. "You see," he had said, flipping through the images with casual indifference, "you are not the first, and you will not be the last. This operation is too important, too profitable, to be stopped by people like you." Elise had stared at the photographs and felt something cold settle in her chest. These were her people, her colleagues, men and women who had served their country with the same dedication she had, who had followed the same oath, who had believed in the same mission. And they had all been betrayed, just like her. Someone inside the Navy was feeding information to Victor Renner, someone with access to classified operations, someone high enough in the chain of command to know about solo reconnaissance missions before they happened. Someone who had sent 6 agents to their death, and now 7. The second day had been worse. Victor's patience had finally run out. He had stopped asking questions and started making statements. He told her that she was going to die, that no one was coming for her, that her body would never be found, and her name would simply disappear from the records, as if she had never existed. "Your father died the same way," he had said, and Elise's blood had turned to ice. Her father, Commander William Calloway, the man who had taught her to swim before she could walk, who had pushed her to be stronger and faster and smarter than anyone expected, who had been her hero and her compass until the day the Navy told her he wasn't coming home. They had said it was a training accident, a night dive gone wrong. They had given her a folded flag and a medal and told her that her father had served with honor, but they had never let her see the body. "What do you know about my father?" she had demanded, and Victor had smiled. "More than you do, I suspect. More than the Navy ever told you." He had leaned close, his breath hot against her face. "Ask yourself something, Lieutenant Commander. Your father was investigating weapons smuggling when he died, just like you. Does that seem like coincidence?" Before she could respond, he had straightened and turned to his men. "We are finished here. Prepare her for disposal." Now, 18 hours later, Elise was alone in the Pacific Ocean with those words echoing in her head. Her father had been investigating weapons smuggling, just like her, and he had died for it, just like she was supposed to. The same operation, the same betrayal, 15 years apart. Someone had been running this network for at least that long. Someone inside the Navy with the power to eliminate anyone who got too close. And now that someone thought Elise Calloway was dead, sinking toward the bottom of the ocean with a cinder block tied to her ankles. They were wrong. She swam. The flare from an oil platform glowed on the horizon, a vertical shimmer of light that gave her something to aim for. She estimated the distance at roughly 10 nautical miles. Under normal circumstances, a strong swimmer could cover that in 6 to 8 hours. But these were not normal circumstances. Elise was injured. The cuts on her wrists had stopped bleeding, but the wound on her thigh where one of Victor's men had slashed her before throwing her overboard was still seeping. She could feel the blood trailing behind her in the water, a breadcrumb trail that anything with a sense of smell could follow. She was hypothermic. The Pacific was cold at night, cold enough to kill in a matter of hours without proper insulation. Her wetsuit helped, but it was torn in several places, and her core temperature was dropping steadily. She was exhausted. 48 hours of torture had drained her reserves. Every stroke felt like lifting a weight. Every kick sent pain shooting through her legs. And she had no weapons except a 3-inch ceramic blade and her training. But she also had something Victor Renner hadn't counted on. She had her father's voice in her head, the lessons he had taught her before she was old enough to understand why they mattered. Pain is just information, he used to say. It tells you where you're hurt and how bad. Use that information. Don't let it use you. She used it now. She cataloged her injuries as she swam. The thigh wound was the most serious, probably deep enough to require stitches, definitely deep enough to attract predators. The cuts on her wrists were superficial. The damage to her face was painful, but not dangerous. Her shoulders ached from the stress positions, but they were functional. She could survive this. She had to survive this. Because somewhere out there, a beacon was transmitting. And somewhere in the Navy, someone was listening. And if she was very, very lucky, that someone wasn't the same person who had betrayed her. 3 hours into her swim, Elise felt the water change. She had been swimming steadily, pacing herself, using the current instead of fighting it. The flare on the horizon was closer now, though still impossibly far away. But something was different. The ocean had gone still beneath her. Too still. The usual movement of deep water, the subtle currents and temperature gradients, had disappeared. She stopped swimming and let herself float. Silence. Then, beneath her feet, a presence. Not a current, not debris, something alive. Something large. Elise's hand moved slowly to the ceramic blade still tucked into her belt. Her eyes scanned the darkness below, searching for any sign of movement. She didn't have to search long. It emerged from the black like a ghost. 12 feet of muscle and teeth gliding through the water with a predator's perfect efficiency. Oceanic white-tip, the most dangerous shark in the open ocean. Responsible for more human deaths than all other shark species combined, though most of those deaths went unreported because they happened to shipwreck survivors and downed aviators. People who disappeared without trace. People like her. It circled her once at a distance of 20 feet, its small eyes reflecting what little starlight reached this depth, its blunt nose testing the water, testing the blood, Elise's blood. She understood now why Victor's man had cut her thigh before throwing her overboard. It hadn't been cruelty for cruelty's sake. It had been insurance, a failsafe. The wound was positioned precisely, deep enough to bleed steadily, but not deep enough to sever the femoral artery. They wanted her alive long enough to attract predators, long enough to suffer. They had wanted to make sure she died, even if she somehow escaped the cinder block. They had cut her deep and let her bleed, and now that blood had called something up from the deep. The shark circled again, closer this time. 15 feet, then 10. Elise remained perfectly still. She remembered her father's lessons about sharks. He had encountered them many times during his career, and he had survived every encounter by following the same rules. Stay vertical. Make yourself look big. Never turn your back. Never show fear. And if it attacks, fight back with everything you have. The shark disappeared into the darkness below. Elise waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then it came at her fast, rising from below like a torpedo. its jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth designed to tear flesh from bone. Elise twisted in the water, bringing her blade around in a tight arc, leading the shark past her instead of letting it hit her head-on. The blade caught the creature's gill slit as it passed, slicing through the sensitive tissue. Blood clouded the water. The shark thrashed, its massive body colliding with Elise's hip, sending her spinning. She lost her grip on the blade. The shark looped around for another pass, slower this time, hurt but not deterred. The scent of its own blood mixed with hers in the water, driving its predator instincts into overdrive. Elise reached for her belt and found the emergency flare clipped there. It was small, designed for signaling rescue aircraft, but it would work for this too. The shark came at her again. She ignited the flare underwater, the chemical reaction producing a burst of blinding light and searing heat. The shark veered away, confused by the sudden stimulus, its primitive brain overwhelmed by sensory input. Elise threw the flare as far as she could, watching it trail fire through the dark water. The shark followed. For a long moment, she floated alone in the sudden darkness, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. Then she retrieved her blade from where it had fallen, kicked toward the surface, and resumed swimming. The flare on the horizon was waiting, and so was her beacon. Dawn broke across the Pacific in shades of gray and gold, the sun rising behind a thin layer of clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. Elise had been swimming for nearly 8 hours. Her arms had stopped hurting somewhere around hour 5. They had gone numb instead, moving through the water on pure muscle memory, while her conscious mind drifted in and out of focus. The flare was close now, close enough that she could see the platform beneath it, a massive steel structure rising from the ocean like a technological island. But close was not the same as reached. Her core temperature had dropped below critical levels. Her body was shaking constantly, a tremor that she couldn't control and couldn't stop. Her vision was blurring at the edges, the world going soft and unfocused. She was dying. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly and inevitably. Hypothermia was stealing her heat. Blood loss was stealing her strength. Exhaustion was stealing her will. In another hour, maybe less, she would simply stop swimming. She would slip beneath the surface and let the ocean take her, and no one would ever know how close she had come. Her father's voice spoke to her again. The Callaways don't quit. Ever. You hear me? You keep going until there's nothing left, and then you find a way to keep going anyway. I'm trying, she whispered to no one. I'm trying. The words came out as a croak, her throat raw from salt water and dehydration. And then she heard it, a sound beneath the wind, beneath the waves, a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the water and into her bones. Rotors. Elise lifted her head, squinting against the rising sun, and saw it. A black dot on the horizon moving fast, growing larger by the second. Navy helicopter, MH-60 Seahawk, search and rescue configuration. They were looking for her. The beacon had worked. Someone had heard the signal. Someone had tracked it to this stretch of empty ocean, and now they were coming. Elise reached for the small mirror clipped to her flotation sleeve and angled it toward the sun. The surface was cracked, the edges worn, but it still caught the light. Flash, pause, flash, flash. The international distress signal. 3 short bursts repeated every 10 seconds. She kept flashing until her arm was too tired to lift, then switched hands and kept flashing some more. The helicopter changed course. It dropped altitude, banking hard toward her position, the rotor wash kicking up spray from the surface of the water. Elise let herself float on her back and watched it come. For the first time in 48 hours, she allowed herself to feel something other than determination. Hope. The helicopter hovered directly above her, its side door open, a rescue diver descending on a cable. He hit the water 10 feet away and swam to her with powerful strokes. U.S. Navy, he shouted over the noise of the rotors. You're safe now. Elise gripped his arm with what little strength remained. Tracked vessel, she gasped. Freighter, weapons. The diver's eyes widened behind his mask. You're Lieutenant Commander Calloway? She nodded. Your beacon, he said. It's still transmitting. We've got the ship on scope. They think you're dead. Elise looked up at the helicopter, at the crew chief leaning out of the door, at the cable that would lift her to safety. Then she looked back at the diver. Good, she said. Let's keep it that way. And in that moment, in the space between one breath and the next, the hunted became the hunter. The rescue basket swung beneath the MH-60 Seahawk like a pendulum, buffeted by rotor wash and ocean spray. Elise Calloway hung in the harness with her eyes closed, letting the cable pull her up through the chaos of wind and water. Her body had stopped shivering. That was a bad sign. Hypothermia victims shivered until their core temperature dropped below a certain threshold, and then they stopped. The body gave up trying to generate heat and began shutting down instead. She was aware of this in a distant, clinical way. The same way she was aware that she had lost approximately 2 pints of blood, that her right thigh was still seeping through the makeshift tourniquet she had fashioned from her wetsuit sleeve, that her left eye had swollen completely shut. The basket cleared the helicopter's door, and hands grabbed her immediately. 2 crew members in flight suits hauled her onto the deck and laid her flat on a stretcher that had been bolted to the floor. Core temp is 89 degrees, someone shouted. She's severely hypothermic. Get the warming blankets and start a heated saline drip. A face appeared above her. Young, concerned. The flight medic. Ma'am, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name? Elise tried to speak. Her jaw wouldn't cooperate. The muscles had locked up from cold and exhaustion. She tried again. Calloway, she managed. Lieutenant Commander, Echo 6 clearance. The medic's eyebrows rose. Echo 6 was one of the highest security clearances in naval intelligence. It meant she wasn't just another officer who had fallen overboard. Get the commander on comms, he called over his shoulder. Tell him we've got a live asset. Priority 1. Elise grabbed his arm before he could turn away. Her grip was weak, barely enough pressure to hold a coffee cup, but it got his attention. The ship, she said. Tracking beacon, port side hull. Still transmitting. The medic stared at her. Ma'am, you need to focus on staying alive right now. You can debrief when we get you to a hospital. No hospital. Elise forced her eyes open wider, forced her voice stronger. The ship is carrying stolen American weapons, hundreds of crates, heading for buyers in the Horn of Africa. She paused, gathering strength. They think I'm dead. They think no one is coming. If you medevac me to San Diego, they'll make port before anyone can intercept. The weapons will disappear. The network will go dark. The medic hesitated. Behind him, she could see the sensor operator at his console, headphones pressed to one ear. She's right, he called out. I've got the beacon on scope. Weak signal, but steady. Vessel is approximately 40 nautical miles northeast, heading 170. At current speed, they'll reach international waters in 6 hours. The pilot's voice crackled over the internal comm. What's the call? We're supposed to transport her to Naval Medical Center. Elise looked at the medic. Get me to a ship, she said. Any ship with strike capability. I know the layout of that freighter. I know where they keep the weapons, where they station guards, where the blind spots are. She paused again, fighting to stay conscious. I spent 48 hours memorizing every inch of that vessel while they tortured me. That information dies if I die. And right now, I'm the only person alive who has it. The medic studied her face for a long moment. Then he keyed his radio. Command, this is Rescue 7. We have Lieutenant Commander Calloway on board. She is requesting tactical diversion to nearest naval asset for time-sensitive intelligence delivery. Please advise. Static. Then a voice Elise didn't recognize. Rescue 7, negative on diversion. Orders are to transport asset to Naval Medical Center San Diego for immediate treatment. Over. Elise's blood went cold. Not from hypothermia this time. Something was wrong. Standard protocol for a recovered intelligence officer with critical time-sensitive information was immediate debriefing at the nearest secure facility. You didn't send them to a hospital where the information might be lost or delayed. You extracted every piece of intelligence while it was still fresh. Unless someone didn't want that intelligence extracted. Unless someone was trying to make sure the freighter reached port before anyone could stop it. She grabbed the medic's arm again. Who gave that order? He checked his console. Came through Fleet Command. Admiral's signature. Admiral. There were only 3 admirals with authority over this sector, and one of them had personally assigned her to this mission. Admiral Richardson, the man who had served with her father, the man who had recruited her into naval intelligence, the man she had trusted for 15 years. Elise felt something shift inside her chest, a cold certainty settling into place. Someone had betrayed her. Someone had sent her to that freighter, knowing she would be captured and killed. Someone had been running interference for Victor Renner's operation for at least 15 years. Long enough to have gotten her father killed too. And now that same someone was trying to make sure she never told anyone what she knew. She looked at the medic. That order is compromised. He blinked. Ma'am, I said the order is compromised. Someone in Fleet Command is protecting the people who tried to kill me. If you follow that order, you're helping them finish the job. The medic stared at her. She could see the conflict in his face. He was young, probably 5 years out of training. He had been taught to follow orders, to trust the chain of command, to believe that the system worked. But he was also looking at a woman who had been beaten nearly to death, thrown into the ocean with a cinder block tied to her ankles, and somehow survived to tell him that the system had failed her. I don't have the authority, he started. Then find someone who does. Elise's voice was stronger now, the warmth from the blankets in the heated IV finally starting to take effect. USS Colorado, Virginia-class submarine. It's running exercises in this sector. Get me to that boat. The sensor operator spoke up. She's right. Colorado is 40 minutes out. I can raise them on secure channel. The medic looked at the pilot, then at Elise, then at the blood still seeping through her bandages. Ma'am, with all due respect, you should be dead right now. Your body is shutting down. If I don't get you to a trauma center in the next 2 hours, you might not survive the night. Elise met his eyes. If you take me to San Diego, 600 stolen American weapons will end up in the hands of people who want to kill Americans. People who have already killed at least 6 intelligence officers. People who killed my father. She let that sink in. I didn't survive 10 hours in the Pacific to die in a hospital bed while the men who threw me overboard sail away free. Now get me to that submarine. The medic held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned to the pilot. Change of plans. Set course for intercept with USS Colorado. I'll handle the paperwork when we land. The helicopter banked hard to the east. Elise closed her eyes and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't safe yet, wasn't even close, but she was still moving, still fighting, still alive. And that was more than Victor Renner had counted on. The USS Colorado surfaced like a leviathan breaching from the deep. Black hull glistening with seawater, sail rising against the gray sky, radar masts spinning slowly in the morning light. Elise watched it emerge through the helicopter's open door, the rotor wash kicking up spray from the water as the pilot maneuvered into position above the submarine's deck. She had seen Virginia-class submarines before, had trained aboard them, had studied their capabilities until she could recite them in her sleep. 7,000 tons of American engineering, 4 torpedo tubes, 12 vertical launch system tubes for Tomahawk missiles, a hull designed to be quieter than the ambient ocean noise itself. But she had never seen one quite like this, because this one was her lifeline. The Colorado had been running deep water exercises when the distress call came through. Now it sat on the surface like a sleeping predator, ready to wake at a moment's notice. The winch lowered her to the deck, where 2 sailors in blue coveralls caught the basket and guided it down. A medical officer was waiting, his face grim as he took in the state of her injuries. Lieutenant Commander Calloway? She nodded. I'm Dr. Patterson. We're going to get you below and start treatment immediately. Treatment can wait. Elise struggled to sit up in the basket. I need to speak to your commanding officer. Now. Dr. Patterson frowned. Ma'am, your core temperature is still dangerously low. You've lost a significant amount of blood. You have multiple lacerations that need to be sutured. You are in no condition to brief anyone on anything. Doctor, Elise fixed him with her good eye. There is a freighter 40 nautical miles from here, carrying enough weapons to start a small war. In approximately 90 minutes, that freighter will reach a point where interception becomes diplomatically complicated. I am the only person alive who knows the interior layout of that ship. She grabbed the edge of the basket and hauled herself upright. So you can either help me walk to the command center, or you can watch me crawl there. Your choice. Dr. Patterson stared at her for a moment. Then he sighed and offered his arm. The captain is going to love you. They made their way down the ladder into the submarine's interior, Elise leaning heavily on the doctor's arm. The corridors were narrow and cramped, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Sailors pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, their eyes widening at the sight of her battered face and blood-stained wetsuit. The command center was located in the forward section of the boat, a cramped space filled with consoles and displays and the soft glow of tactical screens. A dozen officers and enlisted personnel manned their stations, speaking in low voices, monitoring systems that tracked everything from water temperature to enemy submarine activity. At the center of it all stood a man in his late 50s, with silver hair cropped close to his skull, and eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. Master Chief Warren Briggs. He turned as Elise entered, and for a moment something flickered across his weathered face. Recognition. And something else. Something that looked almost like grief. Lieutenant Commander Calloway, he said. I'll be damned, Master Chief. Briggs crossed the command center in 3 long strides and gripped her arm, steadying her as Dr. Patterson stepped back. I served with your father, he said quietly. Panama, 89. He saved my life twice in 1 week. Elise nodded. She had heard the stories. Her father had been a legend in the SEAL community, the kind of operator that other operators told stories about. He taught me everything I know, she said. And right now, I need to use every bit of it to stop the men who killed him. Briggs's eyes narrowed. Killed him? I thought it was a training accident. So did I. Until the same people who arranged his death threw me into the Pacific with a cinder block tied to my ankles. She let that sink in. Someone in Fleet Command has been protecting a weapons smuggling operation for at least 15 years. My father got too close, and they eliminated him. Now they tried to eliminate me. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the officer at the tactical display. Show me the freighter. The display flickered, and a 3-dimensional representation of the ocean appeared, with the USS Colorado at the center. 40 miles to the northeast, a small red dot was moving steadily south. Meridian Star, the officer said. Panamanian registry, though the paperwork is almost certainly forged. She's making 15 knots, heading 170. At current speed, she'll reach the critical boundary in approximately 90 minutes. And then interception becomes a diplomatic nightmare. She'll make port, offload the cargo, and disappear. Briggs studied the display. Then he looked at Elise. What do you know? Everything. Elise stepped forward, pointing at the tactical screen. I spent 48 hours aboard that ship. They kept me in a converted shipping container in the main cargo hold. Here, she tapped the screen and a schematic of the freighter appeared. The weapons are stored in containers on the forward deck, stacked 3 high, approximately 200 crates in total. Small arms, machine guns, anti-tank missiles. All American military surplus with the serial numbers removed. She traced a path through the schematic. Security is minimal, but professional. 8 to 10 men, former military, Eastern European. They run 2-man patrols on rotating shifts. Victor Renner is in command, ex-German Special Forces. He's smart, he's careful, and he's been doing this for a long time without getting caught. Briggs nodded slowly. What's our approach? SDV insertion from the port side. The ship has a ballast vent here that leads directly to the engine room. It's not guarded because they don't expect anyone to approach from underwater. She looked at Briggs. I can guide your team through the interior. I know every corridor, every blind spot, every weak point, but we need to move now. Every minute we wait is another minute closer to losing them. Briggs studied the schematic for a long moment. Then he turned to his executive officer. Get SEAL Team 4 prepped for deployment. Full combat loadout. We launch in 45 minutes. The XO hesitates. Sir, we haven't received authorization from Fleet Command. I know. If we're wrong about this, if there's no weapons on that ship, we could be looking at an international incident. Careers will end. People will go to prison. Briggs turned back to Elise. You're certain about what you saw? She met his gaze without flinching. Master Chief, I watched them pull the American military markings off crates of Javelin missiles. I photographed serial numbers before they were scratched out. I planted a tracking beacon on that hull with my own hands. She paused. And then I spent 2 days being tortured for information about how many other people knew about their operation. They were scared. They were covering their tracks. Because they knew that if anyone ever connected the dots, the whole network would come crashing down. Briggs nodded. That's good enough for me. He turned to his XO. This is my responsibility. Log it as an emergency response to a confirmed threat against American personnel. If anyone wants to court-martial me later, they can get in line. The XO saluted and hurried off to begin preparations. Briggs looked at Elise. You should be in medical right now. You should be letting someone else handle this. I know, but you're not going to do that, are you? It wasn't a question. Elise thought about her father, about the flag they had given her at his memorial, about the questions she had never been allowed to ask. They killed him, she said quietly. They killed him, and they called it an accident, and they let his daughter grow up thinking he died in training. And then when she got too close to the truth, they tried to kill her too. She looked at Briggs. I'm going to stop them. I'm going to stop them, and I'm going to make sure the world knows what they did. And if I have to do it bleeding and half dead, then that's what I'm going to do. Briggs studied her for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. The understanding of people who had served, who had sacrificed, who had lost things that could never be replaced. Your father would be proud, he said finally. I know, Elise's voice caught slightly. Every lesson he drilled into me, every skill he made me practice until I hated him for it, it all came back when I needed it most. Like he knew this day would come. She didn't mean it mystically. She meant it practically. Every lesson he had taught her, every skill he had drilled into her, every piece of wisdom he had passed down during those brief years they had together. All of it had kept her alive. All of it had brought her here. And all of it would help her finish what he had started. The hour before deployment was a blur of preparation and pain. Dr. Patterson stitched the wound on her thigh while she reviewed tactical maps with the SEAL team leader. He injected her with antibiotics while she memorized the faces of the men who would be covering her entry points. He pumped her full of fluids and stimulants while she checked and rechecked the interior schematic of the Meridian Star. By the time she was cleared for combat, she had been patched together with what felt like spit and prayer. The stitches in her leg pulled with every step. Her ribs ached from the stress positions they had kept her in. Her wrists were wrapped in gauze that was already spotted with blood. But she could walk. She could shoot. She could think. That would have to be enough. The SEAL team assembled in the forward torpedo room, 6 men in black dry suits with enough firepower to take down a small army. They ranged in age from late 20s to mid-40s, their faces blank and professional as they checked their weapons and reviewed their assignments. Elise recognized the type. These were Tier 1 operators, the best of the best. Men who had spent years training for exactly this kind of mission. Men who had conducted dozens of operations in hostile waters around the world. The team leader was a senior chief named Hawkins, 42 years old, 3 combat deployments to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, countless operations that would never appear in any official record. He had the calm, measured demeanor of a man who had seen enough violence to know when it was necessary and when it wasn't. His second was a younger operator named Torres, a demolitions expert with steady hands and a reputation for precision. The others were equally skilled, a communications specialist, a sniper, 2 assaulters who could clear a room faster than most people could blink. They had all heard the briefing. They all knew what they were walking into. And they all knew that the woman standing at the front of the room, the woman with the swollen eye and the bandaged leg and the 1,000-yard stare, was the only reason they had a chance. Questions? Elise asked. One of the younger operators raised his hand. Ma'am, what's the ROE? Rules of engagement. How much force were they authorized to use? Elise considered the question. These men are professional soldiers working for a criminal enterprise. They have killed at least 6 American intelligence officers that we know of. They will not hesitate to kill you if they get the chance. She paused. That's another hand. What about resistance? How hard are they going to fight? Hard, Elise admitted. They know what happens if they get caught. Life in prison, minimum. Most of them would rather die than face that. Expect them to fight to the last man. She looked around the room. Any other questions? Silence. Good. We launch in 10 minutes. Get your gear and get to the SDVs. The operators filed out. Briggs remained behind. You sure you're up for this? He asked. Elise picked up her weapon, a suppressed MP5 that felt like an extension of her arm, and checked the magazine. No, she said honestly, but I'm going anyway. Briggs nodded. Fair enough. He handed her a radio earpiece. Channel 4. I'll be monitoring from the Colorado. If things go sideways, call it in and we'll figure something out. She fitted the earpiece and tested the connection. Roger that. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the cramped torpedo room. 2 warriors about to send another warrior into battle. Your father used to say something, Briggs said quietly. Before every operation, he'd say that the ocean doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It only cares whether you're strong enough to survive it. Elise nodded. She had heard the saying before. She had grown up with it. He was right, she said. And I am. She turned and walked toward the SDV bay, her footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. Behind her, Briggs watched her go. Yeah, he murmured to himself. I think you are. The SDV slipped out of the USS Colorado like a shadow detaching from darkness. Elise was wedged into the rear compartment of the miniature submarine, her knees pressed to her chest, her weapons secured across her lap. 2 SEAL operators sat in front of her, their faces invisible behind rebreathers and diving masks. The SEAL delivery vehicle was a marvel of covert engineering. 22 feet long, battery-powered, capable of carrying 6 operators and their equipment to targets up to 36 nautical miles away. It had no pressurized cabin, which meant the passengers were exposed to the water the entire journey. Cold, dark, and claustrophobic. The water was cold, even through her dry suit. It seeped into the compartment and pooled around her ankles, a constant reminder that she was hundreds of feet below the surface in a vessel barely larger than a coffin. The rebreather in her mouth tasted like rubber and recycled air. The only sound was the steady hum of the electric motors and the occasional click of the navigation computer adjusting their course. She had trained in SDVs before. She knew how they worked, knew their capabilities and limitations, knew that statistically they were one of the safest methods of covert insertion available to Special Operations Forces. None of that knowledge made the experience any less claustrophobic. The journey took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of darkness and cold and the steady hum of electric motors. 45 minutes of reviewing the plan in her head, going over every detail, every contingency, every way that things could go wrong. There were a lot of ways things could go wrong. The freighter appeared on their sonar as a massive shadow blocking the surface above them. The SDV pilot adjusted course, bringing them in low and slow toward the portside hull. Elise felt the vehicle settle into position beneath the ballast vent she had identified on the schematic. The vent was 20 feet below the waterline, invisible from the deck, accessible only to someone who knew exactly where to look. The pilot gave a hand signal. Time to go. Elise detached from her seat and swam out of the SDV's rear hatch, moving through the black water with slow, deliberate strokes. The other operators followed, 6 shadows converging on a single point of entry. She found the vent by touch, her gloved fingers tracing the rusted metal until she located the manual release. The mechanism was stiff from years of neglect, but it gave way under pressure. The vent cover swung open. One by one, the operators slipped inside. The ballast compartment was pitch black and flooded with seawater. Elise led the way, swimming through the narrow passage until it connected with an access ladder that led up to the engine room. She surfaced in a pool of oily water at the base of the ladder. The air smelled of diesel fuel and hot metal. Somewhere above, the massive engines that powered the freighter rumbled and clanked. The other operators surfaced behind her, silent as ghosts. Elise climbed the ladder. The engine room was huge, a cathedral of steel and machinery that stretched the full width of the ship. Catwalks crisscrossed overhead, connecting control stations and maintenance platforms. The noise was overwhelming, a constant roar that would cover any sound they made. No guards visible. Elise signaled the demolitions specialist and pointed at the main power junction box mounted on the far wall. He nodded and moved into position, blade ready. She held up 3 fingers. 2. 1. The operator severed the primary power cable with a single, precise stroke. The engine room plunged into absolute darkness. 45 seconds. That was how long before the emergency generator would cycle online. Elise had counted those seconds during her captivity, lying in that steel container, listening to the ship's systems, memorizing every rhythm and pattern. Knowledge bought with blood. Now she would spend it. They moved through the blackness like phantoms, navigating by memory and touch. Night vision was useless in total darkness. Hand signals became shoulder taps. Verbal commands became breath patterns against the ear. 30 seconds. They reached the exit leading to the main cargo hold and stacked against the door. 20 seconds. Elise found the handle by feel, tested the resistance, calculated the swing arc. 10 seconds. She sensed the operators beside her, coiled and ready, invisible but absolutely present. 5 seconds. The emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the corridor ahead in dim crimson. They moved through the door like a wave, weapons up, eyes instantly adjusting. 2 guards stood at the far end of the corridor, still blinking in confusion from the blackout. They never had a chance. These men had been trained for visible threats, for enemies who announced themselves with noise and light. They had not been trained for SEALs who had spent 45 seconds becoming one with the darkness itself. 4 suppressed shots. Both guards dropped without a sound. The team moved forward. Elise pushed open the cargo hold doors and stepped inside. The sight that greeted her was exactly as she remembered. Crates stacked 3 high, stretching from one end of the hold to the other. Hundreds of them, each one containing weapons that had been stolen from American military stockpiles. Each one destined for buyers who would use them to kill. Jackpot, one of the operators breathed. Elise didn't respond. She was already moving, scanning the hold for additional threats, searching for the path that would lead her to Victor Renner. She keyed her radio. Colorado, primary objective confirmed. Preparing to move to bridge. Briggs's voice came back tight with urgency. Callaway, hold position. We just intercepted an encrypted transmission originating from inside your location. Someone on that freighter is broadcasting your exact coordinates. Elise's blood went cold. Impossible. We've neutralized all hostiles in this section. The signal isn't coming from the cargo hold. It's coming from behind you, near the engine room, behind her, the way they had come in. Elise turned slowly, weapon rising, her instincts screaming. A figure stepped out from the shadows between 2 shipping containers. Navy uniform, young face, compact satellite transmitter in his right hand, red indicator light blinking steadily. Lieutenant Garrett Sims. She recognized him instantly. He had been in the tactical briefing aboard the Colorado. He had heard every detail of their insertion plan, every coordinate, every contingency, and he had followed them aboard. Lieutenant, Elise said, her voice flat and dangerous. Put the transmitter down. Now, Sims smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already calculated his odds and accepted the outcome. I'm afraid I can't do that, Commander. Who are you working for? Victor? Richardson? The second name made Sims flinch. Just a flicker, but enough. How much? Elise demanded. How much did they pay you to betray your country? 500,000. Wired to an offshore account the day I agreed to monitor intelligence operations for security leaks. And when we died tonight? When Victor's men killed us all, another 500,000 completion bonus. Elise felt disgust rising in her throat like bile. You're the reason those 6 officers died. You fed them information about every agent who got too close to the network. Sims shrugged. I provided a service, nothing more. Everyone has a price, Commander, even you. Elise moved. 3 steps closed the distance before Sims could react. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus, swept his legs, and dropped him hard onto the steel deck. The transmitter clattered away into the darkness. She pinned him with her knee and zip-tied his wrists with brutal efficiency. My price is justice, she said quietly, her mouth close to his ear. And you just bought yourself a lifetime of it. She hauled him upright and shoved him toward the nearest SEAL operator. Secure him. He comes back with us alive. I want him on the witness stand. The operator dragged Sims away without a word. Elise crushed the transmitter under her boot. The red light died. She keyed her radio one final time. Colorado, this is Calloway. Threat neutralized. We had a mole aboard. Lieutenant Garrett Sims from your crew. He's been feeding the network for at least 3 years. Silence. Then Briggs's voice, heavy with something that might have been grief. Understood. I served with that kid for 18 months. I'm sorry. Don't be. Finish the mission. We'll deal with Sims when you get back. Roger that. Elise shouldered her weapon and headed for the stairs. Victor Renner was up there somewhere. And now there was no one left to warn him she was coming. The stairwell leading to the bridge was narrow and dark, the kind of passage that had been designed for functionality rather than comfort. Elise Calloway moved through it like a predator, her weapon raised, her breathing controlled, her eyes scanning every shadow for movement. Behind her, 2 SEAL operators covered her 6. The rest of the team had fanned out through the cargo hold, securing the weapons crates and eliminating any resistance they encountered. So far, resistance had been minimal. That worried her. Victor Renner was many things. Cruel, methodical, patient, but he was not careless. A man who had run a weapons smuggling operation for 15 years without getting caught did not leave his ship undefended when danger approached, which meant he knew they were coming, which meant he was preparing something. Elise reached the top of the stairwell and paused, pressing herself against the wall beside the door that led to the upper deck. Through the small window set into the metal, she could see the gray light of dawn and the distant shimmer of the ocean. She keyed her radio. Colorado, this is Calloway. Approaching bridge level, Sims has been neutralized. Any additional chatter? Briggs's voice came back immediately. Negative on new transmissions. Whatever Sims told them, they're not talking about it on open channels. Be advised, thermal imaging shows 2 hostiles on the bridge, plus 1 high-value target. Renner. Copy that. Moving to engage. She signaled the operators behind her and pushed through the door onto the upper deck. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of salt and diesel exhaust. The sky overhead was the color of gunmetal, heavy clouds pressing down toward the horizon. The freighter's superstructure rose ahead of her, a tower of rust and steel, with the bridge windows glinting at the top. No guards visible on the deck. No movement at all. Elise didn't like it. She moved forward anyway, keeping low, using the cargo containers as cover. The operators flanked her, their weapons tracking in smooth arcs as they scanned for threats. They reached the base of the superstructure without incident. The door leading inside was unlocked, hanging slightly open as if someone had left in a hurry, or as if someone wanted them to enter. Elise paused at the threshold, listening. She could hear the hum of electronics somewhere above, the creak of metal expanding in the morning heat, the distant throb of the engines below. And something else. Voices. 2 men, speaking in rapid German. The words were muffled by distance and intervening walls, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, angry, afraid. They know, Elise thought. They know we're here and they know they're trapped. Good. She pushed through the door and began climbing the interior stairs toward the bridge. The operators followed, their boots silent on the metal steps. 1 level, 2 levels, 3. The voices grew louder. Elise reached the landing just below the bridge and held up her fist. Stop. The operators froze behind her. She crept forward until she could see through the window set into the bridge door. The space beyond was illuminated by the glow of navigation displays and communication equipment. Two men stood at the far end, both armed, both focused on something she couldn't see. And standing at the center of the bridge, his back to the door, was Victor Renner. He was speaking into a satellite phone, his voice low and intense. Elise couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. She knew who he was talking to. The traitor. The person who had sold her out. The person who had arranged her father's death 15 years ago. She wanted to know who it was, wanted to hear the name, see the face, understand how someone could betray their country and their comrades for money or power or whatever had motivated them. But there wasn't time. Victor finished his call and lowered the phone. His shoulders straightened, his head turned slightly, as if sensing something in the air. Then he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the closed door. "I know you're there, Lieutenant Commander. You might as well come in." Elise's blood went cold. He knew. He had been expecting her. This whole approach, the empty corridors, the unmanned checkpoints, the unlocked doors, it had all been designed to draw her in. She had walked right into it. For a moment, she considered falling back, regrouping with the team, finding another approach. But Victor's next words changed her mind. "I have something you want to see, something about your father. Come in alone and I'll show you. Or stay out there with your soldiers and the truth dies with me." Her father. Elise closed her eyes and made a decision. "Cover the exits," she said quietly to the operators behind her. "If anyone comes out except me, put them down." Then she pushed open the door and walked onto the bridge. Victor Renner turned to face her as she entered, a smile playing at the corners of his thin lips. He was unarmed, his hands visible at his sides, his posture relaxed and confident. The two guards raised their weapons immediately, training them on Elise's chest. She kept her own weapon lowered but ready, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard. "Lieutenant Commander Calloway," Victor said, his German accent curling around her name like smoke. "I must admit I am impressed. I threw you into the Pacific Ocean with 40 pounds of concrete tied to your ankles. I cut your leg to attract sharks. I left you to die in the most hostile environment on Earth." He spread his hands. "And yet, here you are." "Here I am," Elise agreed. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You said you had something to show me, about my father." Victor's smile widened. "Direct, I like that. Your father was the same way. No games, no pretense, just straight to the point." He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, and Elise's weapon came up instantly. "Easy," Victor said, showing her what he held. A small USB drive, black plastic, unremarkable. "This is what you came for. Or part of it anyway." "What's on it?" "Everything. 15 years of records. Every shipment, every buyer, every payment. Names, dates, account numbers." He turned the drive over in his fingers. "And the name of the person inside your Navy who made it all possible." Elise's heart hammered in her chest. "Who?" Victor laughed softly. "You think I'll just tell you? After everything you've done? After you've destroyed my operation, killed my men, cost me millions of dollars?" He shook his head. "No, Lieutenant Commander. Information like this has value, and I intend to negotiate. You're in no position to negotiate anything. Your ship is captured. Your weapons are seized. Your men are dead or surrendering. In about 10 minutes, a Navy helicopter is going to land on this deck and take you into custody, where you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell." Elise took a step forward. "So here's my counteroffer. Give me the drive and tell me who the traitor is, and I'll make sure the prosecutors know you cooperated. You might even live long enough to see the sun again someday." Victor considered this for a moment. Then he laughed again, louder this time. "You really are your father's daughter. He made the same offer, you know. 15 years ago in a warehouse in Hamburg. He had me cornered, just like you do now. He thought he had won." The smile faded from Victor's face. He was wrong. Elise felt the words like a physical blow. "What happened to him?" "He was betrayed, just like you were betrayed, by the same person, using the same methods, for the same reasons. Victor stepped closer, close enough that Elise could see the pale blue of his eyes, the network of fine scars that mapped his face. Your father discovered this operation in 1989. He traced the weapons, identified the buyers, built a case that would have brought down everyone involved. And when he was ready to go public, when he had everything he needed, someone inside the Navy warned me. He paused. I didn't kill him myself. I was in Hamburg at the time, but I watched the video later. I saw what happened to him. Elise's hands were shaking now, the weapon trembling in her grip. Who? The same person who sent you to this ship. The same person who gave me your name, your face, your insertion point. The same person who has been protecting this operation since before you were old enough to understand what protection meant. Victor held up the USB drive. It's all here. Every piece of evidence you need, every communication, every payment, every order, enough to bring down not just me, but everyone who has profited from this network for the past 15 years. He extended the drive toward her. Take it. See the truth for yourself. Elise stared at the small piece of plastic in his hand. Everything she had wanted since the day her father died. Every answer to every question that had haunted her for 15 years. It was right there. All she had to do was reach out and take it. She lowered her weapon and stepped forward. Victor's smile returned. I knew you would see reason. Your father was stubborn to the end, but you understand that sometimes compromise is necessary. Elise took the drive from his hand. You're right, she said quietly. I do understand compromise. Then she raised her weapon and shot him twice in the leg. Victor screamed and collapsed, his hands clutching his shattered knee. The two guards moved to raise their weapons, but the SEAL operators had already burst through the door behind Elise. 4 shots. Both guards dropped. Elise stood over Victor, watching him writhe on the deck, blood pooling beneath his body. That's for my father, she said. And this is for me. She crouched down and grabbed his jaw, forcing him to look at her. You thought I would just let you walk away? You thought I would make a deal with the man who helped kill my father? Who tortured me for 2 days? Who threw me into the ocean to drown? She leaned closer. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to end this. Victor coughed, blood flecking his lips. Kill me then. Get it over with. Elise released his jaw and stood up. No. Victor blinked, confusion cutting through the pain. What? I'm not going to kill you. That would be too easy. Too quick. She looked down at him with something that might have been pity. You're going to live. You're going to stand trial. You're going to sit in a courtroom while the whole world watches and listens to every crime you've ever committed. You're going to see your network destroyed, your associates arrested, your legacy reduced to nothing but a footnote in a history book about weapons trafficking. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. And every single day, for the rest of your miserable life, you're going to know that a woman did this to you. The daughter of the man you helped murder. That's your punishment. That's your justice. Victor stared at her, hatred and disbelief warring in his eyes. You think you've won? You think this is over? I know it's over. She turned away from him and walked toward the bridge windows, looking out at the gray ocean stretching to the horizon. Behind her, she could hear the SEAL operators securing Victor's wounds, calling in the helicopter for extraction. It was done. Almost. She still had the USB drive clutched in her hand, still had the name of the traitor waiting to be revealed, still had one more piece of unfinished business. She plugged the drive into the bridge's navigation computer and began scrolling through the files. Financial records, shipping manifests, communication logs, and there, buried in a folder labeled only with a date, a series of video files. Elise clicked on the first one. The screen flickered, and suddenly she was looking at a warehouse. Dark, industrial, somewhere in Europe, based on the signage visible in the background. A man stood in the center of the frame, his hands bound behind his back, his face bloody and bruised. Her father, Commander William Calloway. Younger than she remembered, stronger, but unmistakably him. He was speaking to someone off camera, his voice defiant despite his obvious injuries. You think this changes anything? You think killing me stops this? There are others. They know what you've done. They'll come for you, a voice responded. A voice Elise recognized. No, Commander, they won't, because no one will ever know what really happened here. As far as the Navy is concerned, you died in a training accident. A tragic loss. A hero's funeral. The camera panned slightly, revealing the speaker, Admiral Richardson, Elise's mentor, her father's friend, the man who had recruited her into intelligence, who had sent her on this mission, who had betrayed her to the same people who had betrayed her father. On the screen, Richardson stepped closer to Commander Calloway. You should have stayed out of it, William. You should have looked the other way like everyone else. But you always had to be the hero, always had to do the right thing. He raised a pistol. This is what the right thing gets you. A single shot. Commander Calloway crumpled. The video ended. Elise stood frozen, staring at the blank screen. Behind her, she could hear the helicopter approaching, could hear the SEAL operators talking in low voices, could hear Victor Renner groaning in pain. But all of that seemed very far away. She had seen her father die. She had seen the face of the man who killed him, and that man was still out there, still in command, still sending other agents to their deaths. Not for long. She ejected the USB drive and slipped it into her pocket. Then she keyed her radio. Colorado, this is Calloway. Target secured, requesting immediate extraction. Briggs's voice came back. Copy that, Calloway. Helicopter is 2 minutes out. What's your status? Elise looked around the bridge, at the blood on the floor, at the shattered windows, at Victor Renner lying in a heap against the navigation console. Mission accomplished, she said, but I have one more target to acquire. A pause. Care to elaborate? I will. In person. This isn't something I can say over an open channel. Another pause. Understood. See you on deck. Elise ended the transmission and walked out onto the bridge wing, letting the cold ocean air wash over her face. The helicopter was visible now, a black dot growing larger against the gray sky. She thought about her father, about the flag they had given her at his memorial, about the lies she had believed for 15 years. She thought about Admiral Richardson, about the trust she had placed in him, about how easily he had used that trust to send her to her death. And she thought about what came next. The evidence on the USB drive was enough to destroy Richardson, enough to expose the entire network, enough to bring justice not just for her father, but for the 6 other agents who had died investigating this operation. But evidence wasn't enough, not on its own. She needed to confront him, needed to look him in the eye and let him know that she knew. Needed to see his face when he realized that the woman he had tried to kill was the one who had brought him down. The helicopter touched down on the deck, its rotors kicking up spray from the wet metal. SEAL operators began moving Victor Renner toward the open door, his shattered legs dragging behind him. Elise followed, climbing aboard and strapping herself into a seat across from her former captor. He watched her with hatred in his eyes, but he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The helicopter lifted off, banking toward the USS Colorado. As the freighter fell away beneath them, Elise allowed herself one moment of something that felt almost like peace. She had survived. She had won. She had done what her father had been unable to do, and she wasn't finished yet. 3 weeks later, Elise stood in a federal courtroom in San Diego, her hand raised, her eyes fixed on the judge. She had spent those 3 weeks in debriefings and hospital rooms, recovering from her injuries while intelligence officers picked apart every detail of her mission. The wound on her thigh had required 37 stitches. Her left eye had taken 10 days to fully open. The hypothermia had done subtle damage to her extremities that would take months to fully heal. But she was alive, and she was here. The evidence from Victor's USB drive had proven even more damaging than she had hoped. 15 years of meticulous record-keeping, every shipment documented, every payment traced, every communication archived. Victor Renner had been thorough. He had kept records as insurance, as leverage, as protection against the day when his partners might decide he was more liability than asset. He had never imagined that those records would be used against him by a woman he had left to die in the Pacific Ocean. 17 arrests so far. Military officers, government contractors, foreign nationals. The network that had protected Victor Renner for 15 years was crumbling, one compromised agent at a time. Lieutenant Garrett Sims had been the first to break. Confronted with the evidence of his transmissions and facing the certainty of life in military prison, he had traded everything he knew for a chance at eventual parole. Names, dates, account numbers, communication protocols. His testimony alone had led to 7 additional arrests, including 2 officers at Fleet Command who had helped funnel classified mission data to Victor's network for over a decade. Sims would spend the next 40 years in Leavenworth, but not before he had helped tear down the very network he had served. Elise found a grim satisfaction in that particular form of justice. And at the center of it all sat Admiral Thomas Richardson, his face gray, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like what he had always been, a distinguished naval officer with 40 years of service and a chest full of medals. But the evidence didn't lie. Elise finished her testimony and stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Richardson's table, she paused. He looked up at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Fear? Defiance? She couldn't tell, and she didn't care. "My father trusted you," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "He called you his friend." Richardson said nothing. He died believing that friendship meant something, that the people he served with would have his back when it mattered. She leaned closer. "I won't make that mistake, and neither will anyone who comes after me, because they'll all know your name, they'll all know what you did, and they'll all remember that you got caught by the daughter of the man you murdered." She straightened. "Enjoy prison, Admiral. You've got a lot of years to think about your choices." Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving him to his fate. Outside, the sun was shining for the first time in weeks. Elise stood on the courthouse steps and let the warmth soak into her skin. Master Chief Warren Briggs was waiting by the curb, leaning against a Navy sedan with his arms crossed. "Hell of a testimony," he said as she approached. Richardson looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Good." Briggs pushed off the car and fell into step beside her. "So what's next for you? Medical leave? Desk duty? I hear they're looking for instructors at the Warfare Center." Elise smiled slightly. "Maybe. Eventually." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Briggs took it, frowning. "What's this?" "A list. Names of everyone who is connected to Richardson's network, but hasn't been arrested yet. Some of them are overseas. Some of them are in hiding. Some of them don't even know we're looking for them." She met his eyes. Victor Renner talked. A lot. Turns out the threat of life in prison loosens tongues pretty quickly. Briggs scanned the list. His frown deepened. "There must be 20 names here." 23. And those are just the ones Victor knew about. There could be more. "You're suggesting we go after them?" "I'm suggesting I go after them. You can help or not. Your choice." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. "Your father used to say the same thing, right before he dragged me into some nightmare operation in the middle of nowhere. He had good instincts. He had a death wish, but he also had the best operational record in the teams." Briggs folded the list and tucked it into his pocket. "I'll make some calls, see what kind of support we can put together." Elise nodded. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 warriors contemplating the battles still to come. Behind them, the courthouse doors opened and closed as lawyers and witnesses and reporters filed out, none of them aware of the conversation happening on the steps. This was how it always was. The real work happened in the shadows, far from cameras and microphones. The real heroes never got their names in the papers. Her father had understood that. He had spent his entire career doing the hard work that no one ever saw, making sacrifices that no one ever acknowledged. He had died in the shadows, killed by a man he trusted, and for 15 years, no one had known the truth. Now they did. Now his name would be cleared, his service would be honored, his sacrifice would be remembered, and his daughter would make sure that everyone responsible paid the price. Finally, Briggs spoke. "You know what your old man used to say after every successful op? He'd say the job's not done until everyone's home safe. You brought everyone home tonight, Calloway. Hell, you even brought him home. After 15 years in the dark, you finally brought him into the light. Elise looked out at the city, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware of how close they had come to disaster, unaware of the weapons that would have flooded the black market if she had failed, unaware of the lives that would have been lost. I know, she said quietly. He's been with me the whole time. She thought about the ocean, about the darkness that had tried to swallow her, about the moment when she had broken the surface and drawn her first breath of free air. The ocean doesn't care who you are, her father had told her once. It only cares whether you're strong enough to survive. She had survived, and she would keep surviving, keep fighting, keep hunting, until every last person responsible for her father's death had faced justice. That was her promise, her mission, her legacy. The daughter of a SEAL, proving once again that the ocean belonged to those who refused to drown. Briggs fell into step beside her as they walked toward the Navy sedan. There's one more thing, he said. Something I didn't want to say in public. Elise glanced at him. The investigation turned up some communications we weren't expecting. Encrypted messages between Richardson and someone else. Someone we haven't identified yet. Another conspirator. Maybe. Or maybe someone higher up the food chain. The messages reference a kingfish. Could be a code name. Could be nothing. Elise stopped walking. You think there's someone above Richardson? I think your father thought so. I found some of his old notes in the archives. He was tracking something he called the silent partner. Someone who stayed completely off the grid. Someone who never touched the money or the weapons directly, but who made all the major decisions. He met her eyes. If that person exists, they're still out there, still operating, still dangerous. Elise looked up at the sky, at the sun breaking through the clouds, at the world that had no idea how close it had come to being a much darker place. Then I guess I have more work to do. Briggs nodded. I guess you do. They climbed into the sedan and drove away from the courthouse, leaving Admiral Richardson to his fate and turning their attention to the battles yet to come. Because the ocean was vast, and there were always more predators lurking in the deep.